My name is Eleanor Marsh. I am 73 years old. I spent 31 years as a pediatric nurse at St. Catherine's Hospital in Asheville, North Carolina. I have held the hands of frightened children, spoken calmly to terrified parents at 2 a.m, and administered medications to tiny bodies that weighed less than my cat. I have never once raised my voice on a hospital floor. Last October, my son called to tell me he and his wife had accepted an offer on my house. The farmhouse on Ridgeline Road, the one with the wraparound porch and the apple orchard my husband planted the year we were married, the one where I raised both my children, buried my dog under the magnolia, and watched 30 years of sunsets from the same rocking chair. Marcus spoke the way he always speaks, gently, as if gentleness could soften what he was actually saying. "Mom, we think it's time. We found a buyer, a young family. They're going to love it." I listened. I set down my tea. I said, "Marcus, that's interesting news." He took my calmness as acceptance. He always has. What he didn't know was that 3 days earlier, I had already found the brochure. The farmhouse on Ridgeline Road was never supposed to outlast Harold. We had planned to grow old there together, the two of us rattling around in 4 bedrooms, arguing over the thermostat, feeding the deer that came out of the tree line at dusk. Harold Marsh, civil engineer, beloved husband, worst joke teller in the state of North Carolina. He died 6 years ago, quietly, in the living room recliner, with a crossword puzzle folded in his lap and the television turned to the Weather Channel. The paramedics said he likely never felt a thing. I have chosen to believe them. After Harold died, people expected me to collapse. I understand why. We had been married 44 years. We had built every part of our life together, from a 2-room apartment on Fletcher Avenue to the farmhouse we found in 1989, foreclosure listing, leaking roof, 17 acres of overgrown land that Harold looked at and said, "Eleanor, I see exactly what this could be." He always saw what things could be. I always measured what they already were. Between us, we got it right most of the time. What people forgot, in their kindness, was that I was a pediatric nurse for 3 decades. I have managed emergencies and conditions that would unhinge most people. Grief is not an emergency. It is a long, slow cartography of a life rearranged. I mapped mine carefully and continued. I kept the house. I maintained the orchard. I hired a young man from the church to help with the heavy work, but I planted the kitchen garden myself every April and canned the tomatoes every August the way Harold's mother had taught me in 1981. My pension paid the bills. Harold's life insurance was sitting, untouched, in an account that my children did not know existed. I was not wealthy, but I was not desperate, and I was not lonely in the way people assumed. I had my books, my garden, my neighbor Ruth, who brought pie every Thursday and never once suggested I should downsize. Marcus, my son, is 44. He works in commercial real estate in Charlotte. He is not cruel. He is efficient. There is a difference, but it can be hard to feel when you are on the receiving end of his efficiency. His wife, Candace, is 42. She has a gift for framing things as concern that are actually proposals. "Mom, wouldn't it be easier if," is her signature sentence. She has never finished one of those sentences in a way that made things easier for me. My daughter, Patricia, is 41. She lives in Raleigh and calls every Sunday, reliably, at 6 o'clock, for exactly 22 minutes. She asks the right questions. She listens to the answers. But when Marcus speaks, Patricia follows. She always has, since they were children. Marcus is the eldest by 3 years and has carried that authority as if it were a job title. Their father's death loosened something in both of them that I had not expected. Not grief, exactly. Something more practical. They began to look at the farmhouse the way developers look at land. Not as a place, but as an asset. It started with suggestions. Then it became plans. And then, last September, while I was visiting Ruth at the hospital after her hip replacement, it became something else entirely. I found the brochure on a Tuesday. I had gone to the mudroom to find my garden gloves and noticed that the drawer in Harold's old work desk had been opened and not properly closed. I closed that drawer with a firm push. Always. Harold built that desk himself from barn wood, and the drawer is heavy. I know exactly what closed feels like. The brochure was underneath an old seed catalog, professionally printed, full color. Sunrise Pines, Assisted Living Community, Fletcher, North Carolina. Tours available by appointment. It was not addressed to me. It had my address handwritten on the back in Candace's handwriting, the capital S with the distinctive serif she has used since I have known her. Someone had brought it into my home and tucked it into my husband's desk drawer and left it there, waiting. I stood in the mudroom for a long moment. Outside, the deer were coming out of the tree line. Harold's deer, arriving on schedule, indifferent to what was happening inside the house. I put the brochure in my cardigan pocket, went back to the kitchen, and picked up my tea. Then I called my attorney. Catherine Webb has been my attorney for 18 years. She handled Harold's estate, updated my will after he died, and once helped me navigate a property tax dispute with the county that took 11 months and ended in my favor. She is 61, silver-haired, methodical, and has a habit of going very still when she is about to say something important, like a bird dog pointing. I called her from the kitchen with the brochure on the table and told her what I had found. I told her about the increasing suggestions regarding the house. I told her about Marcus's comment at Easter. Mom, property values on Ridgeline won't hold. It's a seller's market right now, delivered the way people deliver things they have been rehearsing. I told her about Candace's question at Harold's memorial 3 years ago, whispered during the reception. Has Eleanor ever talked about what she plans to do with the land? Catherine went still on her end of the line. Then she said, Eleanor, when did you last review the deed? I told her the deed was in Harold's name and mine as joint tenants with right of survivorship, and that it had transferred to me alone at his death, properly recorded with the county. She said, good. Then she said, I think we should update some things. We met the next morning. By noon, the farmhouse on Ridgeline Road was placed in an irrevocable living trust. Eleanor H. Marsh, sole beneficiary. Catherine Webb, trustee. The trust document included a provision that no sale, transfer, lease, or encumbrance of the property could occur without my written authorization, witnessed by 2 independent parties and reviewed by the trustee. Any attempt to represent authority over the property without those conditions was explicitly named as a breach triggering legal remedy. Catherine set her pen on the desk. She said, Eleanor, do you know what they're planning? I told her I had a reasonable suspicion. She said, if they move forward without you, we'll be ready. I thanked her, drove home, made a pot of soup, and sat on the porch until the sun went below the ridge. 3 weeks later, Marcus called. His voice was gentle. It was always gentle. Mom, we've been doing some thinking, and we found a buyer for Ridgeline, a family from Charlotte. Young couple, 2 kids. They made a very fair offer, and we think this is the right time for you to make a move. We've already found you a lovely place in Fletcher. 1 level, a garden courtyard, activities program. I sat with the phone in my hand and the compass of 31 years of nursing telling me exactly what was underneath the gentleness. I said, Marcus, how did you find a buyer? He paused, just a half second. We worked with a contact of Candace's. In real estate, I said, and who authorized the listing? Another pause, longer. Mom, we're doing what's best for. I said, Marcus, I am going to ask you one more time. Who authorized the listing of my property? He said, Candace has a power of attorney on file. And that was the moment. Not dramatic, not loud. The moment when the survey reveals the line has been moved and, with absolute precision, exactly how far. I said, Marcus, I'd like you to come to the house on Saturday. Bring Patricia. Bring Candace. Tell them we need to talk about the property. He said, Of course, Mom. I think this conversation is overdue. I said, I agree. Saturday at noon, I'll make lunch. What he did not know, and what I did not tell him, was that Catherine Webb would be sitting at my kitchen table when they arrived. I made chicken and dumplings because Harold loved chicken and dumplings, and because there is something clarifying about doing something with your hands when your mind is occupied with something large. I rolled the dough on the counter the way his mother had shown me. I let the stock reduce. The kitchen smelled like every winter Sunday of our marriage. I set the table for 6. My grandchildren were not invited. That was intentional. What was about to happen at this table was not for children. Marcus arrived first, then Candace, neat in a blazer, as if this were a business meeting, which, I suppose, it was. Patricia last, quiet, eyes moving around the kitchen the way they do when she is uncertain. She saw Catherine at the table and her face changed. Not dramatically, a tightening, an adjustment. Patricia was always the faster reader of situations. Marcus saw Catherine and said, Mom, "You didn't need to bring your lawyer to a family conversation." I set the bread on the table and sat down. I said, "I didn't bring my lawyer to a family conversation. I brought my attorney to a property discussion. There's a difference. Please, sit down. Eat something first." Candace sat. Her jaw was set. She had come prepared for negotiation and was recalibrating. We ate. I asked about the grandchildren. Candace answered in clipped sentences. Marcus ate with the focused attention of a man waiting for a meeting to start. Patricia looked at the window. When the dishes were cleared, I folded my hands on the table. I said, "Marcus, you mentioned a power of attorney that Candace filed. I'd like to see it." He looked at Candace. She opened her bag and produced a document, crisp, folded once. She laid it on the table with the confidence of someone who has rehearsed this moment. I picked it up. I read it once. Then I set it beside my water glass. Catherine spoke. She does not raise her voice. She doesn't need to. She said, "Mrs. Marsh, could you tell us when you signed this document?" I said, "I didn't." Marcus said, "Mom, you." I said, "Marcus, I am 73 years old. I was a registered nurse for 31 years. I have documented medications, patient records, incident reports, and end-of-life care paperwork in conditions of extreme stress. I know my own signature." "That is not it." Candace said, "Eleanor, you may not remember." Catherine said, "Mrs. Buckley Pratt." She corrected herself, "Mrs. Candace." The signature on this document was submitted for independent forensic review 4 days ago. The analysis is here. She placed a 3-page document on the table. The conclusion is clear. This was not signed by Eleanor Marsh. The kitchen was very quiet. Outside, I could hear a cardinal in the apple orchard Harold had planted in 1991, the same orchard Candace's buyer was planning to turn into a parking area for a secondary dwelling. I said, "Marcus, I know you love me. I believe that is true. But I need you to understand something." He was staring at the forensic document. His face had lost its professional composure. He looked, for a moment, like the boy who had broken the living room window with a baseball in 1989 and told Harold it must have been the wind. I said, "I found the Sunrise Pines brochure in your father's desk 6 weeks ago. I know someone brought it here without asking me. I know the listing on the property went up without my authorization. I know there's a buyer who has been told this sale is proceeding. And I know that the power of attorney you've been using to move forward is not valid." Patricia said, "Mom." Her voice was the smallest I had heard it since she was 8 years old. I didn't know about the signature. I looked at my daughter. I believed her. I believe her still. But not knowing is its own kind of decision. I said, "Patricia, not knowing requires not asking. You knew something was happening with this house, and you didn't call me." She looked at the table. She said, "I thought you would fight it. I thought it would upset you." I said, "I am upset. I am deeply upset. But I am not going to pieces. I am going to explain exactly what is going to happen next." Catherine laid out the documents the way a surveyor lays out instruments. Orderly, sequential, no wasted motion. "The farmhouse on Ridgeline Road was placed in an irrevocable trust 42 days ago," she said. "The trust cannot be sold, transferred, or encumbered without Eleanor's explicit written authorization, witnessed and reviewed by the trustee. That's me. Any listing of this property without those authorizations constitutes fraud. The forged power of attorney constitutes forgery, a felony in the state of North Carolina under General Statute 14119. Marcus said, "We didn't forge anything. Candace handled it." Candace said nothing. She was very still in the way people go still when they are calculating. Catherine said, "Mrs. Candace, the document bears a signature that forensic analysis confirms is not Eleanor's. Whether you signed it yourself, hired someone, or obtained it by other means, you presented it as a valid authorization for transactions you had no legal authority to conduct. That is a matter for law enforcement to sort out." Candace said, "This is a family matter." I said, "Candace, you tried to sell my house while I was alive and standing in my kitchen. What part of that is a family matter?" She looked at me for a long moment. She is not a bad person. I want to be careful about that. She is a woman who made a calculation and let that calculation override her conscience. I have seen that in 31 years of nursing. People do not always choose wrong because they are evil. Sometimes they choose wrong because the right thing is harder and the wrong thing is right in front of them. She said, "Eleanor, You're alone here. You're 73. You climb ladders. I said, I climbed a ladder last September to clean the gutters. I will likely climb one next September. And when I no longer can, I will ask for help. That is my decision to make, Candace, not yours. Marcus said, Mom, we were afraid. I said, I know you were, Marcus, and I understand fear. I spent 31 years in a pediatric ward. I know what fear looks like, and I know what it makes people do. But fear is not authorization. It is not a deed. It is not a power of attorney. It is just fear. And it ends here. The cardinal was still singing in Harold's orchard. I said, here is what happens next. The sale is void. There is no valid authorization, and the trust makes that legally unchallengeable. Catherine has already contacted the buyer's agent to inform them the listing was made in error and no valid seller authorization exists. That conversation happened yesterday morning. Marcus looked at his hands. I said, the forged power of attorney has been documented and preserved. Whether I pursue criminal charges is a decision I have not yet made. I want you to hear that clearly. Not yet. What I decide will depend on what happens in this room today and in the weeks that follow. Candace said, what do you want, Eleanor? I said, I want to be treated as a person, not a property. I want my children to call me because they want to speak to me, not to assess my condition. I want to be asked, not managed. I want to make my own decisions about my own life and my own house for as long as I am capable of making them. And I want an apology, a real one, not the kind that sounds like it's explaining why the thing was actually reasonable. The kitchen was very quiet again. Patricia said, Mom, I'm sorry. Her voice was steady, but her eyes were not. I should have called you the moment Marcus told me what they were doing. I said, yes. You should have. Marcus said, Mom, He stopped. He is not a man who apologizes easily. He started again. I thought I was protecting you. I said, Marcus, I spent 31 years protecting children who couldn't protect themselves. I know what protection looks like. That's not what this was. This was a plan made without me. And those are two very different things. He nodded. He did not have words, which is rare for my son. Candace said nothing. She looked at the window. The cardinal had moved deeper into the orchard. The months that followed were not simple. Nothing ever is. Marcus and I had 3 long phone calls in November, the kind where silence takes up as much space as words. He is not a villain. He is a man who learned to solve problems by moving fast, and he moved fast in the wrong direction. We are finding our way back, carefully. The way you navigate land after it has flooded, testing each step before you commit your weight. Patricia calls every Sunday still. 6 o'clock, 22 minutes. But now she asks different questions, real ones, and sometimes we run over. Candace and I are not there yet. I do not know if we will be. Some bridges need to be rebuilt from both ends, and only one crew is working. I have patience. I was a pediatric nurse. I understand that healing moves on its own schedule. The forgery matter was referred to the county district attorney's office. That process is ongoing. I did not push for it, and I did not stop it. The law runs on its own current. The farmhouse is mine. The trust is ironclad. The apple orchard is coming into bloom. Last April, I planted the kitchen garden later than usual because my back was bothering me, and I chose to wait rather than push. My neighbor Ruth helped me with the heavier beds. We planted tomatoes, basil, cucumbers, and 3 rows of sweet corn that Harold always insisted belonged in every proper garden. The corn came up straight and tall by July. I still sit on the porch in the evenings. I watch the deer come out of the tree line the way they have done every dusk since Harold planted those apple trees. I hold the cup he gave me on our 40th anniversary, blue pottery, chipped now on the rim, still perfect. The mountains hold the last of the light and let it go slowly, the way I have learned to let things go. Not all at once. Gradually. With intention. I teach now, 1 morning a week at the senior center in town. The class is called Your Home, Your Rights. I bring copies of deed documents, trust instruments, plain language explanations of what a power of attorney actually requires and what it cannot do. The women in that room are between 60 and 84. They come because they are worried. They leave because they are ready. Last week, a woman named Grace, 71, a retired school teacher with reading glasses on a bright blue cord, raised her hand and said, "How do you protect yourself from the people who love you?" I thought about Harold's crossword puzzle folded in his lap. I thought about the apple orchard at dusk. I thought about 31 years of hospital floors, and the one thing you learn in that work above all others, that kindness and clarity are not opposites. That you can love someone completely and still hold a firm line. That the most important thing you can give a frightened person is not reassurance. It is information. I said, "Grace, you protect yourself the same way you protect anything you've spent a lifetime building. You learn the law. You get it in writing. You find good counsel and use them. And you never let anyone mistake your quiet for confusion." She nodded. She wrote it down. Outside the senior center windows, the town of Asheville was going about its October morning. People walking, leaves falling, the mountains sitting where they have always sat, patient and unhurried, watching everything. I drove home on Ridgeline Road, pulled into the gravel drive, walked past Harold's orchard, climbed the porch steps, my porch steps, and sat in my rocking chair. The deer came out at dusk, right on schedule. I have held that house for 35 years. I intend to hold it longer. Not out of stubbornness. Not out of fear. Because some things are worth holding, and you know them by the weight they carry in your hands. I didn't stop being their mother. I stopped being their decision to make. There is a difference. And now they know it, too. If this story reminded you to check your deed, call your attorney, or simply call your mother, do it today. Drop a comment below and tell me your story. I read every one. Subscribe and stay with me, because there is always more worth saying.